Hey everybody. Before I get started on today's video, I just wanted to let you know about a big announcement regarding the Hollow's End books. Hollow's End Book 1 is actually going to be out July 1st, 2026. I've got it up on Amazon right now, available for pre-order. So check out the description below or the pinned comment, and I'll have a link to Amazon for Hollow's End Book 1. The channel is still demonetized, so if you're looking for ways to help support the channel, checking out the Hollow's End books is a great way to do that. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed today's story. Gavin always parked in the same spot at the far end of the shipping yard. The one under the sodium lamps that buzzed like they were chewing on their own wires. He liked the distance. It gave him a few minutes of quiet before the shift started. A buffer between the noise in his head and the noise on the docks. Tonight, the quiet felt heavier. The river pushed slow against the pilings, thick and dark, like it was carrying something it didn't want to mention. He stayed in the cab of the forklift longer than usual after shutting it down. The engine ticked as it cooled. His hands stayed on the wheel. He wasn't tired. Not exactly. Just worn in a way that didn't match the hour. He rubbed his thumb along the ridge of a callus and watched fog roll low across the asphalt. The yard lights cut through in long, pale cones that stretched the shadows thin. He told himself to move. He didn't. A radio crackled somewhere across the yard. A forklift beeped in reverse. A gull screamed overhead like it had seen something it couldn't place. Gavin blinked hard, shook off the weight in his chest, and finally swung down from the forklift. His boots hit the concrete with a dull, tired thump. He rolled his shoulders once, trying to shake off the sense that the night had its attention on him. The docks were quiet at this hour, machines cooling the river water pushing slow against the pilings. He rubbed his hands together and headed towards container 47B. The walk wasn't long, but the air tightened the closer he got. He stopped in front of the container. He reached for the latch. It stuck for a second before giving way. When he pulled the door open, a wave of cold rolled out. The cold felt contained, stored, like the inside of the container was holding a secret. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped in a clean, unnatural line across his skin. His breath fogged immediately. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark, catching crates, plastic wrap, labels. Everything looked normal, except for the cold that clung to him like a second shirt. He took another step. A faint click sounded behind him. He turned. The door hadn't moved. The gap of night was still there. Another click. Closer. Gavin lifted the flashlight toward the back of the container. The beam didn't reach the wall. It thinned, bent, and vanished into a patch of dark that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. A wrong kind of dark. A dark that didn't behave like a shadow. His breath fogged again, drifting forward in a slow plume. The plume leaned toward the dark. Gavin's pulse kicked. Is someone in here? The cold deepened, sliding across his arms with the confidence of something that knew it belonged here more than he did. His jaw tightened. His muscles stiffened. He tried to open his mouth, but the cold pressed against his lips like a hand. His breath fogged harder, pulled toward the distortion in short, involuntary bursts. The darkness shifted, not into a shape, not into anything he could describe, just shifted, like something inside it had changed its mind. Gavin stepped back, heel hitting a crate. The jolt ran up his leg. He steadied himself on the wall. The steel felt colder than the air, cold with purpose. His flashlight flickered. The darkness pulsed once more, subtle but unmistakable. Gavin's throat tightened. He tried to inhale. The air didn't move. His chest clamped in a way that felt intentional, like invisible pressure closing around his lungs. He tried to scream. His heartbeat kicked once, hard, then again, weaker. The cold surged. His legs buckled. His awareness narrowed to a thin strip of dark. Something that had been waiting for him to open the door. Gavin never finished his next breath. The cold didn't leave the container when he died. It stayed where it was, settled into the metal like it had found a home. The yard outside kept moving. Forklifts, radios, footsteps. But none of it touched the air inside 47B. The cold held its shape. Gavin's body slumped against the far wall, eyes open, jaw locked, expression frozen in a moment he didn't have time to understand. The cold around him didn't fade. It thickened. It pressed into the seams of his clothes, the lines of his face, the stillness of his chest. Somewhere outside, a horn blared. A worker shouted. A crane groaned under its own weight. Inside the container, nothing moved. It didn't take long for someone to find the body. It took even less time for the call to reach Homicide. Before sunrise, when the world still felt half-assembled, Jackson Scott sat in his car outside the yard gate and let the minute pass. His coffee sat untouched in the cup holder. The sodium lamps buzzed over the shipping yard like they were trying to stay awake. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. He'd been on Homicide long enough to know the difference between a routine call and a problem. Dispatch hadn't said much. Worker found dead. No signs of trauma. Supervisor requesting immediate response. But the tone had carried weight. Supervisors didn't get nervous over heart attacks. They got nervous over things they couldn't explain. He stepped out of the car. The morning air had a damp bite to it. Nothing unusual for the riverfront. Cranes loomed overhead like skeletal frames waiting for skin. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Workers moved with the slow, resigned pace of people told to keep the yard running, but not to look at anything too closely. Jackson ducked under the tape and walked toward the open container. He stopped at the threshold. The cold hit him immediately. He rubbed his arms and crouched beside the body. Gavin Short sat slumped against the back wall. No bruising, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Just a man who looked like he'd seen something he didn't have time to understand. Jackson exhaled slowly. His breath fogged. He stood and scanned the container again. The cold clung to the walls in a way he couldn't explain. His flashlight beam felt thinner here, like the air was swallowing it. Footsteps approached behind him. He turned. Veronica Reed stepped under the tape, her ID clipped to her coat, her expression calm in a way that didn't match the temperature. Most detectives in the city knew her by reputation. Consulting psychic, medium, whatever label people used when they didn't want to say the word out loud. Jackson had worked with her twice before. Both times, she'd walked into a scene like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "You made good time," he said. "I was nearby," she replied. Her voice was steady, almost quiet. She walked past him and crouched beside the body, studying Gavin's face with a focus that bordered on clinical. "No trauma," she murmured, No defensive wounds. Yeah, Jackson said. Looks like he just died. Veronica didn't respond. She lifted her gaze toward the back of the container, eyes narrowing slightly, as if something in the air had shifted. You feel that? Jackson frowned. Feel what? The cold. It's concentrated back here. He stepped beside her. The temperature dipped a little deeper near the back wall, enough to make his breath fog harder, enough to make him rub his jaw. She stood and walked toward the center of the container, her movements slow, measured. She paused in a spot where the air felt heavier, like the cold had settled there overnight. It started here, she said. Jackson blinked. What did? She looked at him, expression unreadable. Whatever happened to him? He studied her face. She didn't look spooked. She didn't look confused. She looked like someone who had already formed a conclusion and was waiting for the evidence to catch up. You've seen something like this before? He asked. A few times, she said. Different places. Same feeling. What feeling? She hesitated. Not long, but enough for him to notice. Presence, she said finally. Like the air remembers something. Jackson exhaled, watching his breath fog again. You think someone else was in here with him? I think something was, she said. He frowned. Some thing? Veronica stepped past him, heading toward the exit. We should talk to the supervisor. I want to know who opened this container before Gavin did. Jackson followed, unsettled by the certainty in her voice. Behind them, the cold in the container lingered like a held breath. The supervisor's office sat in a prefab building that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and diesel. Jackson stood near the door while Veronica questioned the supervisor with the kind of calm precision that made people talk more than they intended. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't push. She just asked questions in a way that made silence feel like the wrong answer. The supervisor kept rubbing the back of his neck. He opened it alone, I swear. No one else logged entry. No one else had a reason to be there. Veronica nodded once, as if she'd expected that. Jackson watched her. She didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. She moved like someone who already knew the shape of the truth and was just checking the corners. When they stepped back outside, the sun had climbed a little higher, but the yard still looked washed out and tired. The cranes cast long shadows across the asphalt. Workers kept glancing towards 47B like it was a mouth that might open again. Veronica walked ahead of him, her pace steady, her posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the scene. Jackson followed, feeling the weight of the cold still clinging to his jacket. They reached the container again. The cold hit him again. Not as sharp as before, but still wrong. Still too contained. Veronica walked straight to the back of the container, stopping in the same spot she'd paused earlier. You're sure this is where it started? He asked. Yes. Her voice was quiet, but not hesitant. She crouched, fingers hovering an inch above the steel floor. She didn't touch it. She never touched anything. But she moved like she could feel something rising from the metal. Jackson watched her. You're basing that on, what, temperature? Temperature, air density, pattern of condensation. She straightened. And intuition. Intuition? He repeated. She met his eyes. You asked. He couldn't argue with that. He stepped beside her, rubbing his arms as the cold settled deeper around them. His breath fogged in a thin plume. You run warm or something? He asked. Something like that, she said. He waited for a smile. She didn't offer one. Veronica walked toward the center of the container, stopping again in a place where the air felt heavier. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. Whatever happened to Gavin? She said. It wasn't sudden. Jackson frowned. He looks like he died instantly. He didn't. Her tone was matter-of-fact. He had time to realize something was wrong. How do you know? She hesitated again, just long enough to register. His posture, she said. The way his jaw locked, the angle of his shoulders. People react differently when they're surprised versus when they're afraid. Jackson studied her face. She wasn't guessing. She was stating facts. Jackson stepped back toward the entrance, needing warmer air. So, what's your theory? Veronica didn't answer immediately. She walked to the threshold of the container, stopping just before the sunlight touched her shoes. She looked out at the yard, at the workers, at the cranes, at the river. Then she looked back at him. Something was here, she said. Something that doesn't leave marks. Jackson felt a prickle crawl up his spine. You think it'll happen again? Yes. How soon? She didn't blink. Soon enough. He stared at her. You sound certain. I am. She stepped out of the container, leaving the cold behind her like a room she'd already memorized. Jackson followed, unsettled by the way she moved. Calm, steady, almost comfortable in the wrongness of the scene. By the time they cleared the scene and the tape came down, the night had already shifted its attention to another corner of the city. The diner's back door always stuck when the humidity climbed, and tonight it fought her twice before giving up. Marissa Lane stepped into the alleyway, with her apron half-tied and her hair still smelling faintly of fryer oil. The alley usually carried the warm stink of trash and old grease. But tonight, the air felt cleaner. Too clean. Like the space had been scrubbed of something she couldn't name. She checked her phone. 2 messages from her sister, one from her manager reminding her about the morning shift, and shoved it back into her pocket. She walked toward her car. The alley was too quiet. Too quiet for a Friday night. The bar across the street should have been spilling noise into the air. Someone should have been smoking behind the pizza place. A delivery truck should have been idling somewhere nearby. Instead, the silence pressed in like a lid. She pulled her jacket tighter. Halfway down the alley, the temperature dipped. Not a breeze. Not the night cooling down. A clean, sudden drop, like stepping into a room where someone had opened a freezer door. Marissa stopped. Her breath fogged in a thin plume. The plume drifted forward, then curved slightly left, as if nudged by a force she couldn't feel. She frowned. Okay. Weird. She took another step. The cold followed. Not around her. With her. Like a shadow keeping pace. Her breath fogged again, drifting forward in a slow plume. The plume leaned left again, toward the darker end of the alley. Marissa swallowed. Hello? Her voice sounded too small in the narrow space. The lamps above buzzed. One flickered twice, then steadied. The cold deepened, sliding across her shoulders with a weight that felt intentional. Her breath fogged harder. The plume snapped forward, pulled toward the far end of the alley. Marissa froze. The shadows there shifted. Not movement, not a shape, just shifted, like the darkness had changed its mind. Her pulse quickened. She reached into her bag for her keys, fingers brushing metal. The cold pressed against her back, firm and steady, like someone standing too close. She turned sharply. No one was there. But the cold didn't retreat. It held its ground. Her breath hitched. Okay, enough. I'm leaving. She took 3 fast steps toward her car. The cold moved with her. Her breath fogged again, and this time, the plume jerked forward, pulled toward the shifting dark with sudden force. Marissa's throat tightened. The shadows at the end of the alley pulsed once, subtle and unmistakable. Her jaw stiffened. Her chest tightened. She tried to inhale. Nothing moved. Her keys slipped from her hand, hitting the asphalt with a soft, metallic clatter. The cold wrapped around her like a curtain being drawn shut. Her awareness narrowed to a thin strip of dark. Something moved in it. Something she couldn't see. Something she couldn't name. Something that had been waiting for her to walk outside alone. Marissa Lane never reached her car. The alley didn't warm after she was killed. The cold held its shape like a memory that refused to fade. The dumpster sat silent. The lamps buzzed overhead. A cat darted across the far end of the alley, then stopped abruptly, fur bristling, before bolting in the opposite direction. A delivery truck rumbled past the mouth of the alley without slowing. The driver didn't look down the narrow space. He didn't see the faint plume of fog still drifting near the ground, pulled toward a corner where the shadows stayed too still. By dawn, Marissa's body had been found. The alley behind the diner was taped off when Jackson arrived, the morning sun barely clearing the rooftops. He ducked under the tape and stepped inside. The cold hit him first. Not sharp, not dramatic, just wrong. A lingering chill that didn't match the weather. He rubbed his arms and crouched beside the spot where Melissa Lane had been found. The chalk outline looked too small, too fragile. He exhaled. His breath fogged. Footsteps approached behind him. "You got here fast," Jackson said. "I was already out," Veronica replied. She crouched beside him, studying the ground with the same focused stillness she'd shown in the container. Her breath didn't fog. "No signs of a fall," she murmured. "No bruising, no defensive posture." "Same as Gavin," Jackson said. "Same as the others," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Others?" She didn't answer right away. She stood and walked deeper into the alley, stopping halfway down. Her posture shifted slightly, subtle, like someone listening for a faint sound. "This is where it started," she said. Jackson joined her. The temperature dipped another degree. His breath fogged harder. "You're basing that on what?" he asked. "Air density, temperature gradient," she paused, "and intuition." He huffed a quiet breath. "You keep saying that, because it keeps being right." She stepped closer to the far wall, stopping in a patch of shadow that felt heavier than the rest. She didn't touch the bricks, but she leaned in as if reading something invisible. "Marissa stopped right here," she said. She turned around. She saw something. Saw what? Veronica didn't move. Something that frightened her. Jackson frowned. "You can tell that from posture? From the angle of her fall? From the way her keys were found?" She looked at him. People drop things differently when they panic. He studied her face. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't theorizing. She was remembering something he couldn't see. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes." "You're not reacting to the cold." "I don't feel it the same way you do." "That's not normal." "No," she said. "It isn't." She said it without hesitation, without apology, without explanation. Jackson felt a prickle crawl up his spine. Veronica stepped past him, heading toward the mouth of the alley. "This wasn't random," she said. He followed her out, unsettled by the certainty in her voice. Jackson lingered beside the cruiser after she left, staring down the alley like it might shift if he blinked. The cold still clung to the air, thin but present, a residue that didn't match the weather. He rubbed his arms, trying to shake it off. It stayed in the fabric of his jacket, stubborn and patient. A dumpster lid slammed somewhere behind him. A worker cursed. A dog barked down the block. Normal sounds. None of them made the alley feel less wrong. He finally got into his car and shut the door. The interior held the leftover warmth of the afternoon, but the cold in his clothes didn't lift. He sat there for a long moment, watching his breath fog faintly in the air. He didn't know what they were dealing with. Veronica did. That scared him more than the cold. Across the city, another room held its own kind of quiet. The laundromat always felt too bright during the day and too hollow at night. Stephen Price had worked there long enough to know every tired sound the machines made, every rattle in the vents, every flicker in the lights that meant the ballast was going. Quiet shifts didn't bother him. They gave him space to think, or avoid thinking. Tonight, he wasn't sure which he needed. He locked the front door, the metal frame rattling in its track. The neon sign outside hummed against the glass, throwing a tired pink wash across the floor. The dryers along the back wall spun their last cycles, the low vibration running through the tiles. He crossed the room toward the folding table, rubbing the back of his neck. The fluorescent light above him buzzed in a thin, irritated rhythm. He glanced up, waiting for the usual flicker. It didn't come. The bulb held steady. Too steady, like he was paying attention. He reached for the laundry basket. The temperature dipped. Not a draft. Not the AC. A clean, sudden drop, like someone had opened a freezer door behind him. Stephen paused. His breath fogged in a thin plume. The plume drifted forward, then curved slightly right, nudged by something he couldn't feel. He frowned. What the hell? He took a step. The cold moved with him. Not around him. With him. Like a shadow keeping pace. His breath fogged again, drifting forward in a slow plume. It leaned right again, toward the narrow space between the dryers and the wall. Stephen swallowed. "Anyone back there?" His voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. The fluorescent light flickered twice, then steadied. The cold deepened, sliding across his shoulders with a weight that felt intentional. His breath fogged harder. The plume snapped forward, pulled toward the dark gap with sudden force. Stephen's pulse kicked. He stepped back, bumping into a cart. The wheels squeaked. The cold pressed against his spine, firm and steady, like someone standing too close. He turned sharply. No one was there. But the cold didn't retreat. It held its ground. His throat tightened. "Okay, enough. I'm leaving." He took 3 fast steps toward the front door. The cold moved with him. His breath fogged again, and this time, the plume jerked forward, dragged toward the dark gap with a force that made him stumble. Stephen froze. The shadows between the dryers pulsed once, subtle but unmistakable. His jaw stiffened. His chest tightened. He tried to inhale. Nothing moved. The laundry basket slipped from his hands and hit the tile floor with a soft thud. The cold wrapped around him like a curtain being pulled shut. His awareness narrowed to a thin strip of dark. Something moved in it. Something he couldn't see. Something he couldn't name. Something that had been waiting for him to be alone. Stephen Price never reached the door. The laundromat didn't warm after his life was ended. The cold held its shape, settled into the corners like a stain that wouldn't lift. The neon sign outside flickered once, then steadied. A car passed on the street, headlights sweeping across the windows. The light didn't reach the back of the room. The cold stayed where it was. Hours later, the investigation brought Jackson and Veronica into the laundromat. The machine sat silent. The air felt wrong in the same way the container had felt wrong, the same way the alley had felt wrong. Veronica stood near the back wall, posture straight, hands at her sides. She wasn't looking at the machines. She wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking at him. "You're quiet," Jackson said. "I'm thinking," she replied. He stepped closer. "About what?" "About patterns." He waited. She didn't elaborate. "Not cold zones," she said. He frowned. "Then what?" She didn't answer. He took another step. "Veronica?" Her eyes tracked him with a calm that didn't match the room. "Yes? You've been off since the docks. I've been consistent. That's the problem." Her gaze didn't shift. Her breath didn't fog. Her stillness felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Jackson swallowed. "You knew where each victim stood. You knew where they turned. You knew what they saw." "Yes." "How?" She didn't blink. "Because I was there." The cold in the room tightened, pulling the air inward. Jackson's pulse kicked. What does that mean? Veronica stepped toward him. Not fast, not aggressive, just a single, precise step that closed too much distance. "It means you've been looking for something," she said, "and it was standing beside you." Jackson backed up until his shoulder hit a dryer. The metal was cold enough to sting. "Veronica?" he said, voice low. "What are you saying?" She took another step. The lights overhead flickered once. Jackson's voice dropped. "Where is the real Veronica Reed?" "She was useful," the thing wearing her said. "For a time." His stomach turned. "You killed her." "I took her shape." His breath caught. "Why her?" "She was alone. She was warm. She was easy to wear." The cold pressed deeper, intentional and steady. Jackson's throat tightened. "You wore her face." "Yes." "You wore her voice." "Yes." "You wore her life." "Yes." He swallowed hard. "Why tell me now?" "You asked the right questions," she said. "You paid attention." His pulse hammered. "Then why kill me?" She stepped closer. The air bent again, subtle but unmistakable. "Because you paid attention." Jackson's legs weakened. His breath came shallow. The cold pressed against his chest, his ribs, his throat. "You don't have to do this," he said. "There's no have to. There's only what I do." He tried to inhale. Nothing moved. His awareness narrowed to a thin strip of dark. Veronica stepped closer, her outline flickering once, the room bending around her. "You were a good partner," she said. "Better than most." His knees buckled, but not fast enough. She stood in the center of the room, too still, like she was waiting for a cue only she could hear. Then, her shoulders sagged, not in exhaustion, but in release, as if she'd stopped pretending to hold herself up. The air around her dipped in temperature so fast his breath fogged. Her hair didn't fall away so much as slip, the strands loosening like they'd never been attached. Her face followed, skin folding in on itself like fabric losing tension. He saw it then. Not a person unraveling, but a costume collapsing. The woman wasn't transforming. She was stepping out of something she'd worn. The shape underneath pushed upwards, stretching the false skin until seams of frost traced across it. Her silhouette elongated, joints shifting with a brittle, ice-deep crack that made his stomach twist. The mask of humanity peeled back in soft, silent layers, revealing a translucent sheen beneath. Cold, faceted, and wrong. 6 eyes opened where 2 had been, each one reflecting him back in sharp, predatory fragments. Snow swirled at her feet, though the floor was dry. When the last of the human disguise sloughed away, the creature straightened to its full, jagged height, the room bending colder around it. It didn't roar or lunge. It only looked at him, patient and unhurried, as if the real horror wasn't the monster revealed, but the realization that had been standing beside him all along. Jackson tried to pull in air and felt nothing move. His chest didn't rise, his ribs didn't widen, his throat stayed locked, a sealed passage. Panic hit fast and stupid. Breathe, breathe, breathe! But his body wouldn't obey. He opened his mouth to scream. No sound came out. Not even a rasp. His tongue wouldn't lift. His jaw wouldn't close. His voice wasn't trapped. It was simply gone, like the part of him that made sound had been switched off. He tried to step back. His legs didn't answer. His knees didn't bend. His weight didn't shift. He wasn't frozen in ice or held by force. His body just refused the command, as if the signal never reached his muscles. His pulse hammered against a chest that wouldn't expand. His vision tunneled. His thoughts scattered into short, frantic bursts. Move, move, move! Nothing. The creature watched him with those 6 cold, reflective eyes, patient as a surgeon waiting for the last twitch to stop. Jackson Scott never finished his next breath. The cold didn't rush out of the laundromat. It didn't fade. It held its place, steady and patient, while the night outside kept moving like nothing had happened. A few minutes later, she walked down a quiet sidewalk with her hands in her coat pockets, her pace steady, her posture relaxed. The night air was mild, but the space around her held a faint chill that didn't belong to the weather. Streetlights buzzed overhead. A bus rumbled toward the stop at the end of the block. Veronica Reed did not look back. She didn't look back at the laundromat. She didn't need to. The bus hissed as it pulled up. The doors folded open. A handful of passengers glanced at her, then away just as quickly, the way people look past something they don't want to register. Veronica stepped inside. The driver nodded without meeting her eyes. His hand hovered over the fare box longer than necessary, like he'd forgotten what he was doing. She dropped the coins in. The machine beeped. She walked past him and down the aisle. The interior lights flickered once. She chose a seat near the middle, by the window. The cushion dipped under her weight. The cold around her settled into the fabric, quiet and patient. A teenage boy sat across the aisle, earbuds in, backpack at his feet. He glanced at her, then looked away, then looked back with a small frown he couldn't explain. His breath fogged faintly, though the bus wasn't cold. Veronica watched the window. The glass held a thin sheen of condensation around her reflection. The rest of the pane stayed clear. The boy shifted in his seat. He pulled one earbud out. Are you okay? Veronica turned her head slowly. Yes. You look kind of pale. I'm fine. He nodded, but his fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. His knee bounced once, then stopped when he noticed it. He looked out the window instead. The bus rolled through the intersection. Streetlights slid across the floor in long strips. The cold around her deepened by a degree, subtle but noticeable. The boy rubbed his arms. Is the AC on? No, the driver called back, distracted. Victoria kept her gaze on the window. Her reflection didn't fog on the glass. The boy noticed. He stared for a second too long. You're not breathing. Victoria blinked once. I am. He swallowed. I didn't see. You saw enough. He froze. She turned her head fully toward him. Her posture didn't change. Her expression didn't shift. But the air between them tightened, like the space had shrunk by an inch. The boy's breath fogged harder. He pressed back into his seat. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... You didn't do anything wrong. He nodded quickly, eyes wide. Victoria looked forward again. The cold receded just enough for him to breathe normally. He stayed silent for the rest of the ride. The bus slowed near the edge of town. a small station, a row of benches, a vending machine humming under a flickering light. Victoria stood. The boy flinched. She stepped past him without looking down. The aisle lights dimmed for a moment as she moved. The driver avoided her eyes again as she approached the front. "End of the line?" she asked. "A couple more stops," he said, voice tight. "I'll get off here." He nodded quickly and opened the doors. Victoria stepped onto the pavement. The cold followed her out, then settled around her like a familiar coat. The bus doors closed. The vehicle pulled away faster than necessary. She watched it disappear down the road. The night was quiet. The town behind her was quiet. The next town would not be. Victoria Reed adjusted her coat and walked toward the station, her pace steady, her posture relaxed, her borrowed shape fitting neatly around her. She hadn't chosen her next face yet.